After an unsuccessful detour into competitive multiplayer in Orcs Must Die Unchained, the Stadia exclusive Orcs Must Die 3 is a return to the co-op action tower defense gameplay that made this series an old favorite of mine. I have to admit I was a little surprised at how literal that return is, though. So much of the selection of traps and menagerie of orcs is recycled from 2012's Orcs Must Die 2 that it feels like the kind of iterative sequel you get 1 year after the last game rather than 8. And the one big new idea, the large-scale war scenario maps, are too spread out to really play to the series' strengths. It's still all good meat-grinding fun, of course, but it's very familiar. Orcs Must Die 3's story is the same goofy fantasy from the previous 2 games. The banter between the 2 new War Mage characters has a couple of chuckle-worthy moments, but outside of that, it's pretty run-of-the-mill.
Wow, it's like you're allergic to saying smart stuff.
The potentially interesting story ideas they hint at, like one of them being an especially gifted magic user, don't actually go anywhere. It's fine, just superficial. But as always, it's immensely satisfying to assemble an efficient slaughterhouse by laying down a variety of different traps and racking up combo scores by bouncing your parade of victims from one to the next. Each of the 18 levels is a challenging puzzle to optimize the enemy's path so that they trigger as many traps as possible and in the right order to maximize their damage. Anything that's left standing you have to deal with yourself using the simple but effective third-person shooting and trinket spells. Each playable character, including those you unlock after completing the campaign, is distinguished by a special movement ability, but I haven't really found them especially useful. For example, Kelsey can hover for a few seconds, but why is that good?
Brains only take you so far.
I'm not sure.
Tell your friends! Oh wait, you can't because you're dead.
The Orcs Must Die art style hasn't changed much from the distinctively cartoony look we first saw in 2011, but it has aged extremely well, and the orcs and environments look great in 4K. I did notice some choppiness during some crowded battles, but other than that it ran smoothly, especially after a restart. All of the locations are some variation on a castle setting, but there's a decent amount of visual variety that keeps it from getting stale. I do wish there was some variation to the rank-and-file orcs and ogres though. When every heavy orc is identical down to how they wear their armor, it makes things a little monotonous by the time you slaughter your 2000th one. The biggest disappointment is that it's pretty much the same cast of villains as in Orcs Must Die 2. There is a new race of purple orcs, but aside from their immunity to fire damage and vulnerability to ice, they basically behave identically to their green-skinned cousins. Those fire fiends did make me diversify my trap builds a bit, since you can't rely as heavily on fire traps and their damage over time as you probably want to. Orcs Must Die 3's biggest new feature is its 5 war scenario maps. These come with their own set of weapons of mass destruction to fight off enormous armies of orcs as they lay siege to your castle. This grand idea never really worked that well though, because outside the castle everything is so spread out. There's little opportunity to control the route of the horde, and it's frustrating to put down an expensive, extra-large trap only to have the vast majority of them simply walk around it. And when the invaders inevitably break down your door, all of the big traps are disabled while you're inside, then it just plays like any other level. Playing through solo, it felt like war scenarios are balanced toward the 2-player co-op, where one person could thin out the orcs' numbers by manning a catapult and bombarding them as they charge, while the other mops up the survivors inside. But if it's just you, you have to fall back to the interior as soon as the doors are breached. Partially for that reason, the difficulty across the 18 scenarios felt wildly inconsistent. I was able to get a top score on some maps with just a couple of attempts, while others I had to try a half dozen or more times just to complete at all on standard difficulty, which inflated my playtime to around 25 hours. But I haven't yet unlocked every trap, so it's nice that there are still things to work toward in the post-game and on the endless mode that might help with those barely manageable hordes.
Enemy forces are attacking!
Orcs Must Die 3 is a respectable, if long overdue follow-up to the excellent Orcs Must Die 2, but it feels more like an expansion to the 2012 game than a true revival or sequel. It's certainly worthwhile for the 18 new and challenging maps it comes with, but its selection of traps and enemies are overly familiar and the large-scale war scenarios don't meaningfully expand on the great third-person action meets tower defense idea like you'd expect. For more on Orcs Must Die 3, check out some gameplay footage, and for everything else, stick with IGN.